At dawn, the mountains were silent. Snow rested undisturbed across the peaks. Valleys lay hidden beneath drifting mist. And beyond those mountains, Europe was tearing itself apart. Armies were marching, borders were being redrawn by force, empires were calculating their next move. But here, nothing moved, nothing changed. So here's the question that's fascinated historians for centuries. How does a small nation, sitting right in the middle of the most powerful continent on Earth, remain completely unconquered? This is why Switzerland is almost impossible to invade. And the answer? It's not what most people expect. It's not about size, and it's definitely not about aggression. It comes down to three things: stone, preparation, and something far more calculated than either of those. Now, look at a map of Europe. Really look at it. Switzerland sits right in the center, completely surrounded by history's most powerful states. France to the west, Germany to the north, Italy to the south, Austria to the east. These weren't just neighbors, these were nations that reshaped entire continents, nations that swept across borders without hesitation, nations that built empires. And yet, through centuries of European conflict, as alliances shattered, empires collapsed, and wars consumed everything around it, the Alps remained untouched. On paper, a small country sitting at the crossroads of Europe should have been swallowed up a long time ago, but history is rarely decided by size alone. Let's talk about the Second World War, because this is where the story gets really interesting. Europe fell with startling speed. Poland was crushed in weeks. France, one of the great military powers of the world, surrendered in 6 weeks. Armies swept across open plains and through major cities like they weren't even there. And Switzerland? Switzerland was sitting right there, within reach, a small, neutral country surrounded on multiple sides by Axis-controlled territory. Plans were actually drafted, military options were examined, strategic advantages were weighed. The possibility of invasion was completely real, and still, it never came. Why? Let's break it down. The first reason rises high above the valleys, quite literally. Nearly 60% of Switzerland is covered by the Alps. Not gentle hills, not rolling countryside, we're talking steep ridges of granite and ice, towering cliffs, narrow passes carved through some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. In open terrain, think the plains of Poland or northern France, large armies thrive on speed and coordination. They spread out, they flank, they overwhelm. In the Alps, both of those advantages vanish almost immediately. Mountain roads twist along exposed slopes with nowhere to go. Supply lines stretch dangerously thin. Armored divisions that were unstoppable on flat ground suddenly can't maneuver. Artillery becomes a nightmare to position. An advancing force wouldn't move freely through Switzerland. It would slow, it would bottleneck into narrow passes, it would become completely predictable. And when you're predictable in terrain like that, the defender holds every advantage. But here's the thing, geography alone doesn't stop an empire. History has plenty of examples of difficult terrain being overcome by a determined enough force. Switzerland knew that, so they planned for it, long before conflict ever reached their borders. Deep inside the mountains, fortifications were carved directly into rock. Hidden bunkers were built to overlook valleys. Artillery positions were concealed behind stone facades that looked like natural cliff faces. Bridges were wired for demolition. Rail tunnels were prepared to collapse at a moment's notice. This became known as the National Redoubt, and it was a masterpiece of defensive strategy. If invasion began, Swiss forces wouldn't try to hold every border. Instead, they would deliberately withdraw into the high Alps, and as they went, they would destroy every critical piece of infrastructure behind them. Roads would vanish, passes would close, access routes would collapse into rubble. Any invading army would suddenly find itself fighting uphill against fortified positions in narrow terrain, under constant threat with no reliable supply line behind it. Every single kilometer of advance would demand enormous time and resources, and in wartime, time is often more valuable than territory. But even beyond the geography and the fortifications, Switzerland had another layer of defense that most people don't think about: its people. Switzerland operates under a militia system. Rather than relying purely on a large standing army, it trains its citizens. Reservists maintain combat readiness. Equipment is stored strategically across the country, in homes, in farms, ready to go. Mobilization can happen fast. Every ordinary house could become a staging point. Every valley, every hillside, every village could become a line of resistance. If invasion came, it wouldn't face a single front. It would face an entire nation, spread across impossible terrain, fighting from positions that took generations to prepare. That's an absolute nightmare for any occupying force to deal with. But here's what I find most fascinating. The most powerful defense Switzerland built wasn't physical at all. It was strategic calculation. For any invading power considering Switzerland, the real question was never, can we take it? The question was, is it even worth taking? Difficult mountain terrain, hidden fortifications carved into the rock, an armed population ready to resist from every direction, and at the end of all that effort, a landlocked country with limited strategic value. The cost of occupation would be massive, the benefit? Uncertain at best. And in large-scale war, an unnecessary campaign that drains your forces and your resources can weaken even the strongest military. It's a distraction you simply can't afford. Switzerland didn't need to appear invincible. It needed only to make invasion seem irrational. And that is exactly what it did. Through geography, preparation, and national cohesion, Switzerland transformed what looked like vulnerability into something far more powerful: deterrence. It built a defense not just designed to fight a war, but to discourage one from ever starting. Switzerland isn't immune to conflict. No nation ever truly is. But in these mountains, every single advantage favors the defender. And sometimes the most powerful weapon a country can possess isn't an army, or a navy, or a nuclear deterrent. It's the certainty in the minds of potential enemies that attacking it would simply cost too much. If you found that as fascinating as I did, hit subscribe. We cover the hidden strategies, forgotten stories, and surprising turning points that shaped the world we live in. And drop a comment below. What other nation's defense do you want us to break down next? See you in the next one.